Today's question is, how can I delete an object from Azure Active Directory using the Graph API? Well, it is relatively simple using the delete HTTP request method addressing the concrete object. It is a bit tricky when we are talking about full application authentication, because our application only has permissions to read and write data. As already discussed, we cannot delete data from Azure Active Directory using these permissions here. In order to delete data, this application or this service principal needs to be granted company administrator's role in our Azure Active Directory. And this can be achieved via the Azure Active Directory PowerShell module. So let's start our Windows Azure Active Directory module for PowerShell and run there a couple of commands which will grant the company administrator's role to this service principal. First, we need to connect to the MSO service and log in with a user who is administrator in this directory. Note that here you cannot use a Microsoft account. Here you must use a user which is user inside this Azure Active Directory tenant and has the global administrator permission for this Azure Active Directory tenant. After authenticating, we need to get the service principal. And service principal name for our application is actually our app ID URI. This is the service principal name under which we can find the object in our Azure Active Directory. So let's assign service principal variable to get MSO service principal using the service principal name and pasting this value here. Let's check that we have it. So the object ID would be some global unique identifier. Next thing is we have to add this service principal name to the row company administrator. So let's take the object ID for this row. And prove it. It's row ID. We have the object ID. Let's first check the membership for that row to make sure that this application is not yet added to this row. We see that there are two users who are in that row. So let's now add also our application. We can add it by executing the add MSO row member . And if we prove the membership permissions again, we will see that there is a service principal, which is the Graph API Explorer. Now, if we let a couple of minutes these permissions to be distributed throughout the system and take effectiveness, we can go back to our script for deleting the user. And you remember that we got an error by the first time we executed the script because we didn't have sufficient permissions. Let's execute this script now and see what happens. And remember, 1M is the one more user we created in our Azure Active Directory. Let's go back to the users and make sure that this user is still there. This is one more user with the user principal name 1M Dayzure on Microsoft.com, 1M Dayzure on Microsoft.com, and run this script. We see we receive status code 204 or accepted, which means that we have successfully authorized this request and executed a delete upon this specific object. identified by the user principal name because it's a user. Let's go back to our Active Directory and refresh the users list. We see that one more user is now missing.